think that if you're like myself, I can't wait to get back into my classroom with my students after hearing Dr. Morrell talk and really galvanize some thinking around how are we being so responsive for students. And our panel today are three examples of teachers who are doing a lot of the work that exemplifies that approach towards teaching. So we're very fortunate to have three teachers here. First, Nancy Zeider is a first grade teacher. She was also a Golden Apple finalist last year. Zoe Cassidy is a high school media specialist at Streeter High School and one of our doctoral students. And Gail Capert from DeKalb High School, who is an ELL teacher and also one of our doctoral students. So just like yesterday, each one of them will go through a little bit about what they do in their classrooms, tell you about their experiences, and then we'll open it up to the floor with questions. So we'll start with Nancy Zeider.
Hi, I teach first grade in Bolingbrook. This year was pretty unique in the fact that Common Core was coming into play, and also we had a brand new math curriculum and a brand new reading program. So there's a lot of change going on. When Mike came to me and said, would you speak about your practice or reflections on how you have student responsiveness, I kind of thought, how do I put all that into 10 minutes? So I got the idea to do a Prezi here kind of more as a crutch than I think it'll give you some good graphics though also. But I think that it kind of wrote itself, just like Dr. Moreau was saying. For me, most of my practice is built on connections and threads that weave through the year that kind of knit together our whole program. And I hope that you'll see from this presentation what I'm talking about. There is a little bit, stepping into Common Core, there's a little walking connotation here. I hope that's not too hokey, but I thought it kind of went into teacher jargon here. So on your mark, you're building community. I think for me, the most essential part is those first couple days of school when you're building trust and having the children realize that they can take risks in the classroom, that we're a family for the year, and that anything you say is okay, that you stick up for each other. Also along with that is building respect. I feel like without respect for children toward the teacher and teacher toward the children, that really hinders the program. I think that if you really listen to how you talk to children, there are subtle things that you do or raises of your eyes at times when you're frustrated that other children pick up on that really can diminish your practice. So very careful about that, just a very fun, happy, respectful culture in my classroom. We build a lot of common experience that we're in this together, that we learn from each other, and that just permeates, I think, from the minute you walk in the door. The children, we start with a picture of themselves on this day. It was on the playground, and I actually made a poster out of that, and it hangs in our classroom. And I did purposely choose a fun being on the playground, just because when they look at that, they think of fun, and then what is that kind of connotation for the year when they look into our room. But my room is filled with pictures, framed pictures of different themes that we do, or different holidays, or just because, just like at home, that brings back memories and that brings back feelings of your classroom. So that's on our mark, building community there. And then our get set piece is when we kind of get more into the nuts and bolts and connect learning. We have a lot of theme days in our first grade team, and a lot of those are literary based, but we do have some, not just because of Common Core, but because of the push over the past few years on nonfiction, we have a lot of those things, which you'll see in a minute, that also kind of connect our learning. The theme days not only are just, reading a book and maybe doing a cooking activity or something, but there's math and literature and science, and we're getting into STEM activities. I am going to a conference, so we'll be adding those to getting that engineering piece in there, but hopefully that's just being responsive to the kind of jobs that they'll have in the future. On 50s Day, we tied in math, and the children just kind of live that, and not only thinking about the number 50, but what would it be like to live in the 50s. They can't believe that I lived in the 50s, and that I was 1959, I was in kindergarten. referring to that Ruby Bridges book, I tell them that's the year I went, just like she did, and they just look at me like I'm a dinosaur. But I think all those connections, all those things just are so important. Polar Express Day, we make a train out of paper. We read the book, of course, but then we get on a train and they have a golden ticket, and so much writing, so much rich writing comes out of that. What would it be like to visit the North Pole? Or if you could design a train, what would it look like? All kind of math and science and reading in there. And then, of course, we have to get Dr. Seuss in there in a first grade classroom. We have Dr. Seuss Week with all kind of fun activities tied to math and reading. And then we have a Green Eggs and Ham Day where the kids start by making their own green eggs and ham, and then we have a read-in, and parents come and read. And parents are so important to my program, because with the connections that you make with the parents, that learning leaves your classroom walls and goes out to home, and so much writing and rich tasks are done at home, and they bring in and share. So I'm really very appreciative of that also. So after we're going into a little bit, we get into our Go piece, which is our workshop-based programs. This year we went with the sisters with that Daily 5, and I'll be honest with you, building stamina at the beginning, I thought, what are you going to do with first graders building stamina with graphs, and you get to this many minutes, and we charted it. But I will tell you, at days at the end of the year, I would think, this is like obscene that I can just sit here and they're out doing their stuff and I can meet with kids. And I mean, 45 minutes of reading or writing and conferring, and it just worked like a charm. So I have a funny story. We have a luau at the end of the year with parents that come and share their writing portfolios. And the luau ended, and there were a couple days of school left, and the things were getting packed up, and I realized I packed up the good writing paper, and they took their portfolios home. So I thought, I wonder how workshop's going to go today. And they came up and asked, can we use the scrap paper to write? And they were just continuing to write. So then I thought, wow, this really is remarkable that these kids have just bought into this writing approach. And I started it in September rather than January this year, and it really paid off because there were just cadres of kids. Our principal came in one time and they were talking to her about how they were writing a sequel for the other book and what each one was going to do, and just using literary terms, and it was just very rewarding. The read-ins, we have tons of read-ins, and then also math gets in there. We have a math brain time. In this case, we read the 500 Hats of Bartholomew Cubbins, and they were trying to show what 500 was. So various children around the room were getting whatever manipulatives they needed to show that. So it was a fun way to tie math in. As we're nearing the finish line here, running the race, we have a lot of special projects. One of those is an end of the year countdown. I know a lot of schools do that, but we, in this case on M Day, built a magic tree house, and the kids just thought that was marvelous that they had this magic tree house they could go in and read. I'll show you a connection to that at the end here. And then we do an embryology project, which brings in that science. I just fill the room with nonfiction, many high level, many lower level, but the kids do research, and it's just research that comes from the heart, because they are the parents of these little developing embryos, and they just really buy into that. We have an outdoor garden at our school, and just getting them outside and getting them into nature, and then reading books about that. And also we do a butterfly unit, and I'll have an artifact in a minute for that to show how much they get into that. But there's just exuberance in what they're doing every day. I was trying to think in 179 plus days, how do you sum that up into this 10-minute talk? But that, these are kind of the highlights. Then reaching the finish line, student-driven responses, if you can just click on that mic on the, this was something that I did not assign, that a little girl handed in the center, I can't see it though, but I'm going to give you the gist of it. It was, Dear Jack and Annie, I love the adventures that you do, and Annie, I know that you aren't scared, but Jack, you are smart because you do the thinking. And she figured that out just from that. If you know the Magic Treehouse series, Jack is the thinker, and Annie just goes off, and she was just so enthralled by that. And then she went on to say that she wanted to read books, and if she could have a treehouse full of books, that she would gladly go into that. And it just touched my heart that that was written by her, and kind of she brought that out of the books on her own. And then we always get these goodbye chick notes, like they're the parents, and they write, I'll never be the same without you. And it's just so touching. We had the same thing for butterflies. Actually, letter writing is not a Common Core standard now for first grade, but they just want to write letters so badly that they just take off with that. If you give them the framed paper, they go with it. But the same thing with butterflies, they just take off. Mike wanted an artifact. One of our end of the year things is magazine publishing project where they're all publishers, or actually reporters, journalists, and they choose what they want to do. And we have interviews in there, book reviews, poems, articles, and I can leave this up here if you want to see it. But actually, this came out of a visit to Illinois, to Springfield, the Illinois Reading Conference. But it's just amazing when you have kids do authentic things, what they will do and just rise to your wildest expectations. So I hope that you run your own race with CCSS, but I hope that you keep that heart in there and that Common Core of motivation, connections, passions, and stamina for your kids. So thank you.
My name is Zoe. I teach at Streeter High School, and Streeter High School is out in the middle of nowhere. I love it there, though. South of Route 80, another 45 minutes or so. I have the opportunity to become the library media specialist. I have been a speech teacher, theater teacher, English teacher. I must get bored along the way. I have some form of teacher ADD. But in the Library Media Center, our library media specialist retired a couple years ago, and I had become certified as a reading specialist, and I was already doing Title I reading in the classroom. And what we decided to do, because of course we're all under budget constraints, was to kind of carve out kind of a new job. We had a full-time library media specialist, and I'm sure many of you, especially in K through 8 buildings, are experiencing where your library media specialists are no longer certified. You don't have to have one in the state of Illinois in a K through 8 building. You only have to have one in a K through 12 situation. We're in a 9 through 12 situation, so we do have to have a library media specialist that's certified in, if you have a high school, then you have to have one. Doesn't mean it has to be a full-time person, doesn't mean, and these are all real sad, horrible things for those of us who are library media specialists. And if you give me an hour, I will cry on your shoulder about it for a long, long time. But we decided, the principal and I and the English chair decided to kind of carve out something that was a little bit, I don't know, a little bit different, a little bit new kind of idea for us. We have a lot of students who need a lot of extra support. We don't really have a tutoring program. We used to have kind of a program where we had students be able to be part of that, but that, of course, funding went the way of all the other funding in the state of Illinois. And so we decided to make the Library Media Center also kind of a tutoring center. And we do what's called a literacy support program, reading pull-out program, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it the literacy support program. But so I'm assigned 3 class periods during the day as a literacy support person. And that means not only literacy support for our students, but also for teachers. And as we have been working with the Common Core, and my school has been, even though we're out there in the cornfields, we've been pretty progressive and proactive about implementing the Common Core. We've been probably, since they started talking about it, trying to kind of weave in a lot of what was being presented to us in terms of the Common Core, especially with our English department, within our reading programs at the school. And that's been a wonderful thing, because our current principal is a former English teacher, and she was former English department chair, so language literacy is very, very important to her. One of the things that we've been doing with that, so now I'm in the library all day. Students are able to self-select and say, hey, I need some help. They can come down, and like during a study hall, I can even pull them out of what we're calling a non-core class, and pull them out and help them with anything that they're having trouble with. And that means just basic literacy support. What that also helps me to do is have conversations with and be a literacy coach to a certain extent with a lot of our faculty, so that students who are having difficulties across the board, even in not only in their English classes, not only in their social studies classes, but also in their science classes. They're having to do a lot more writing. They're having to use APA style. They're having to use writing and write up huge lab reports and things like that, and a lot of our students hadn't done that before. So they're coming to the library. I have a star science teacher who refers a great deal of students to me to help them write lab reports, to help them understand how to write the lab reports, and he works very, very closely with me. I wish I had all the science teachers doing that, but we'll get there. But he really has worked very closely with me in trying to get our students to get to the point where APA style becomes something that they're able to do well and understand, at least to get a hold of the content that they need and marry that with those style patterns that they need to follow. That goes along also with MLA, and I think our English teachers do a really good job of teaching that and helping students and supporting them in that. But then as students, we also have psychology classes and sociology classes that are taught by our local community college, and they're taught on campus, and so students get dual credit. They get high school credit to graduate with, but they also get college credit for Psych 101 or some of those kinds of classes. And most of those students have maybe written one other research paper at this point. We're getting them more into that now. But the seniors that I have this past year, many of them had never written a full-blown research paper until this school year. They thought they did, but they didn't understand what it took to actually prepare a paper for a class. And for some of their classes, it has to be APA style. And some of them, until just very recently, had never had to do something that is APA style. So I do a great deal of individualized kind of support, which is a really, really cool thing, because then I can go back and have conversations with teachers and help them to do things in their classrooms that are going to help all their students. That's a really, really big bonus for me. The other thing is that I do is a lot of readers' advisories, not only with teachers but also with students. You probably do a great deal of that already in your classrooms, but I get a student that I might not know come into the library and say, I'm looking for a book to read, and isn't that a wonderful thing? To have them come in, because when I taught Title I reading, I had students who really didn't even know where the library was, let alone actually come in and say, I want to read a book. Some of them will come in and say, I have to have a book for English class, or so-and-so told me I have to have a book report, or something like that. And we do a reader's advisory, and any library media specialist, along with any teacher, can probably go through and do a reader's advisory. I don't do anything that's scientific. I just try to get to know the student and build trust. And what Nancy said about building trust is huge. You know that as a classroom teacher, getting to know your students. But those of us who are in support capacities, it's even more important to build that rapport and build that trust really quickly so that we can jump on into something that's going to be helpful. So you start to find out what's good, what they want, what's interesting to them, and build that kind of rapport that can help them find what they really, really would like to read. It goes with what Dr. Morrell was talking about in terms of finding what's going to interest them, finding what's going to spark their imagination, and what's going to make them really be excited. I don't get too much into book levels and reading levels and things like that, because I figure if a student wants to read something, I'm not going to tell him that The Invisible Man is a very difficult book to read. You don't want to read that. Put that back on the shelf. I'm not going to say that. Now, I might know in the back of my brain, it's a really tough book to read. And it's a really good book, but it's really tough. And so I'm hoping that the student won't get necessarily frustrated. But then again, maybe I'll have a conversation with him or her about how the book moves along, and I'll say, come back tomorrow. If you didn't like it, if it didn't hook your interest, whatever, come back tomorrow, we'll see what else we can find. What's another bonus for us is that we are open, the library is open all day long for students to pop in, and during free time as well, before school, all during lunch periods, and you don't have to have an extra pass, you don't have to have anything, you can just come into the library, do some studying, access a computer, those kinds of things. And I do a lot of activities, too, with classes that come in. Now, it's not a situation where I'm providing the classroom instruction necessarily, unless a teacher requests that. It's not a regular kind of thing. It has to be a teacher just generates that interest and asks me for that. But then we do a lot of things. A fun website that I like to use to help students understand the dreaded Boolean search. And it's still something that I struggle with, too. But to explain to students how to use that is a website that I just love. It's called Boolify. It looks very elementary, and it is very elementary. It's called Boolify, Boolify, Boolify. And it sounds ridiculous, but it actually takes a Boolean search and allows you to put puzzle pieces together and use those and the word or but, all of those things that you would use in a Boolean search, and help students understand what that means. There's also some cool commercials that I've been downloading and using lately because we want this and this. Have you seen the police who serve or protect? Which one do you want? Serve or do you want protect? And if you've seen that commercial, it's hysterical because the police are there saying that they're going to serve or protect. Which one do you want? So they're going to show you what it's like to be served, and the served is a fast food restaurant. Okay, would you like fries with that? Would you like iced tea? What do you want? And then they decide that they want serve and protect. That would be a better thing. So it's kind of a cool thing to use those kinds of media to help illustrate points to students. But the one other cool thing that I use a lot of times to help students understand the research process is tell them the cute little secret about meta searches and meta search engines, which takes Google and Bing. We don't need to have the fight between Google and Bing. We can go to something like Dogpile, and Dogpile will search Google and Bing and several other search engines at once, not just Google or not just Bing. And to help students get that kind of an idea, the big contest that I always have with students as I'm using this is who can narrow their search enough to come up with only maybe 10 or fewer hits. Because what good is 3.5 million hits, really, if you're searching something? So those are the kinds of things that I have. The other fun thing that I do is a lot of the databases that I use within the library have this dirty little secret, and it's not a dirty little secret, but I tell the students, I tell the teacher, I look at the teacher that I'm helping and say, don't you need to go check in the hall for something? And then I get the students really engaged and say, look at this, and show them on EBSCO and on ProQuest where it'll read it to you. And kids think that that's the most fabulous thing in the world. And I put it on over the speakers in the computer lab, and they listen, and it'll read that journal article. It will read that newspaper article to them. And they think that's the best thing in the world. It will also help them cite, and I show them all those kinds of things. But having that little secret, and then, the teacher can come back. Remember, that's our secret. And letting them know in on those secret kind of stuff. They love that kind of stuff, and they use it. They come back and say that a lot. So those are 3 of my favorite kinds of things to do. And you're free to get hold of me at streeterhighschool.org. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Gail Kappert, and I teach ESL at DeKalb High School. We have about 50 ELL students at our high school. And yesterday I was listening to the teachers talk about the Common Core and thinking, oh, we're way behind. We haven't started the Common Core. We keep talking about the Common Core, and I think it will be the subject of our first Institute Day this coming year. But as an ESL teacher, I'm very familiar with the WIDA standards. And WIDA is Illinois' part of WIDA, and we have standards for the ESL students. And they're very broad, but then they break into some, I think, very helpful can-do lists that correlate really well with the Common Core. And they've done some studies, and there is moderate to strong alignment with the WIDA standards and Common Core. And I see my job as an ESL teacher, I teach a regular course load just like other teachers, but I also feel it's really important for the ESL teacher to be a liaison between the students and the teachers. And because I've talked to high school teachers a lot in my building, and when I first worked there, one of the things they said is we don't know who the ESL students are, because not every ESL student has an accent. Not every student with an accent is an ESL student. And so one of the first things I want to know, who are the ESL students? And so I always made sure to give them a list. But that's not really as helpful as it could be, because just because you know who the ESL students are doesn't mean you know really where they're at. If that student in the corner is quiet, is it because they're new and they don't understand what's going on, or is it just because they just don't feel like talking that day? So if you look on the website, the WIDA website, they have a nice list of can-do goals and for the students. And they're broken down by the students' levels. And all ESL students take the Access, which is also developed by the WIDA. So every student scores, every ESL student has a score. And again, probably elementary teachers, have a lot of that information, but high school teachers often don't. Those scores come to me. I know in my school, so I have them. But a student scores between a 1 and a 6 in reading and writing and listening and speaking. And so what I do is I have a little can-do sheet, and if anybody wants, they can look after them afterwards, and I plot each of the students. So one student might be in the reading, they might be a 2. And that gives some very nice descriptors, and it talks about a student that is a 2, which is a beginning student, can locate a main idea. Now another student might be a 5 in the reading, and they can do, and that's quite high, because a 6 is a perfect score. A student at level 5 can identify evidence of bias and credibility of source. So they're very different kinds of skills. And it also allows you students are often vary on where they are on these can-do lists. A student might be a 6 in a speaking, and they might be a 2 in the reading, or vice versa, and with their listening and their writing. And so I put these down, and I have 50 students, but it actually doesn't take very long. I just plot them on the list, and then I send them out to the teachers, and when the teachers are wondering about students, they can go back and refer to those. And that I think has really has opened up a lot of good communication, because they know who the students are, and they have, an idea where, what they can do and how that relates to their success in the Common Core. I also talk to teachers a lot about, they'll come to me and they'll say, what can I do for these students if they're not being successful? I have a student. And we just talk in general about some strategies. One of the most common strategies that's helpful for students, for ESL students, is they just sometimes need more time. They can do the same activity. And with the business teacher, at one point, we developed a new class. We proposed a class for ESL students, specifically a sheltered class, that she would take keyboarding, teach the same keyboarding class, but she would extend it over a year. And at first, she was quite resistant. She said, really, in keyboard, the students don't need that, because they don't have to interpret the text. They don't have to understand the text. They're just copying the text. So the bilingual teacher and I, we worked closely together. We brought her a text in Spanish, which is not her language. And we said, well, see how you do. Type the Spanish text up, and when her speed was less than half of her normal speed, that's all it took. And she understood the time. And I think it's important for teachers to be able to ask those questions and to have that conversation, because it's like we want our kids to say, well, why should I learn this? And that's not a bad question. I think it's important for teachers to say, well, why do I need to do this with the ESL students? Why do they need that? And there should be a justification for that. A lot of comprehension checking is really important, and not just the academic vocabulary, but sometimes the regular vocabulary is really difficult for students, especially when they're new. I had a teacher that told me this story I thought was really good. She said there was a student in a class, and someone asked her to pass the Kleenex, and they kept saying, Kleenex, Kleenex. And finally the student said, I will clean the X, but where is the X? And so, things like that are sometimes you can make assumptions that a student is being defined, but they're not really. They just don't know where the X is. And I think it's really important to let students use their native language at appropriate times, to have discussion, because we want our students to have academic conversations. And a student who's a 1 or 2 on a speaking and can do, they can answer, who, why, or what questions to a certain extent. They're going to have a different level in their native language, and that can be very intimidating for teachers. But it's really important to have those conversations, and I think it was it came out really well at when we had an in-service once, and we had another teacher presenter from the Illinois Resource Center, Jeanette Gordon. If you ever have a chance to have a session with Jeanette Gordon, she's the most amazing person I've ever met for presenting. And she presented a lesson, and she said, you all can talk about this, because it was a complicated task she had given, but you can only speak Chinese. So, I don't want to hear anything else but your Chinese. And of course, realize that how shut down you are if you're not proficient in the language, and how limited you are. But once you're able to speak your native language with the person next to you, that can be a really good bridge. One thing I do in my classes that's relating to the Common Core, or one thing I'm developing, is we're doing novels, and we're trying to also read complex texts. And in my advanced class, we did this last year, a historical novel. And students it's a hotel on the corner of Bitter and Sweet, which is also a fairly contemporary novel, and it has a lot of importance in the setting. And I knew that students, if they didn't understand the setting and the time, that they wouldn't understand some of the conflicts. And so I decided that we would actually make a whole unit of background. And I know Tim Shanahan talked about not too much background, but I appreciated he made the distinction, don't tell them the story. And we spent 3 weeks talking about the background for the hotel on the corner of Bittersweet, which is talking about World War II and Japanese intervention in China, Pearl Harbor, and then what happened in the with Japanese in internment camps. And we spent a long time in that, and I had students read a lot of informational text, so that related, I think, well to the Common Core and also to the WIDA goals about reading nonfiction. And they prepared Prezis and PowerPoints, which is really important for ESL students to have access to some of those technologies, because even a very beginning student can produce some very nice media presentations, and they feel so good about that. When even if they can't produce a lot of text, they can do some great things with Prezis and PowerPoints. And after that after that 3-week unit, then we got into the novel, and we were able to just sail along in the novel because the background for the conflict was very evident. And other than just doing some vocabulary check, we sailed along at that novel is a 850 Lexile, so it's pretty appropriate for high school. And so they worked really well, and they found a lot of the things that work well in the Common Core and the WIDA standards. They found it's a story about a boy from a Chinese background and who meets a girl from a Japanese background, and all the conflict, and the students came up with a lot of their own understandings that worked well with literary findings when they said, this is really, what is that word? Irony. This is full of irony. And they really did well with that. One thing I'm going to change, which I think will make it align more with the Common Core, is next year I'm developing more of a proposal to actually look at the background knowledge and do those informational readings from a disciplinary literacy strategy, because I didn't do that at all. I admit I took most of them from things like Wikipedia and about.com. I'm sorry. So I want to change that and make that more intentional in that way, but I want to keep going forth with that. And the ESL students do amazing things, so I encourage all of you to make contact with your ESL teacher if you have one in your high school, and to look at those scores and to open up the dialogue between them about the ESL students. So thank you.
Questions?
All of you, great. I like the variety of, it's great. That was a good panel. The person that works in the library, media specialist, I was one, Zoe, thank you. I was wondering, do the kids have to, do they schedule ahead of time? So do you get 15 kids in all at once, or do they, I didn't know if they have to schedule the time or they just come in.
That's an excellent question, and we didn't know how that was going to work. Some do. Some just show up because they need help, and so they're self-identifying and say, I need help on this lab report, or I need help on my paper, or whatever it might be. And I will schedule them. Now, I'm assigned during certain hours for the reading pull-out program and for LMC work, and I have 2 prep periods. I'm a teacher, but I really don't. I was going to be adamant about following that when I first set this up, and I decided that went out the window, because kids need when they need you, and especially if they self-identify. I do get teachers who will schedule certain times if they have, and I've got to go through their schedule, and I have access to all the students' schedules in the entire school, so I can look through their schedule, especially if they're just sent to me. We have a website that teachers can just refer a student, through a little form or whatever. But a parent can do that. Anybody can do that. And once they're identified, even if they're self-identified, I do look at their schedule and see if they've got a study hall. But juniors and seniors are the only students that have study halls in our school. So I have to go down to the next kind of set of classes. So I may pull them, not that these classes are unimportant, that's not what I'm saying, but I may pull them from a foods class. I may pull them from an auto class or from PE, or depending on what their schedule is. Because I don't want to pull them from science or, you know, one of those core kind of classes. And I won't pull them like every day from that same class. It'll be a variety of those kinds of things. And yes, at times, I may have 10 or 15 kids that are doing different kinds of things. And so that it becomes kind of a tutoring session where I'm just walking around and helping this student with this, okay, you work on that for a while, and then I'll go over there, and that sort of thing. And some days it's absolutely nuts, because I get, you know, 20 or 30 students, and other days it's maybe I have one that I can really just sit down and work with. Some students, I go back to what Dr. Morrell was talking about in terms of confidence. Some of them have no idea that they know what they're doing. And so you get them started, and they just want somebody to be there to help them along if they have a question. And I found a lot of those students, I get them started, and I keep checking on them, and they're fine, but they know I'm there. And so that's an excellent question. Thank you.
And I also wanted to back up what Gail was saying. I'm a reading specialist, but I share an office with the ESL teacher, and we have several kids in common, but just the things that she does, I can use the things it's really, it is good to know your ESL teacher and the kids and what helps them best.
A quick question for the first grade teacher. You said you got a new reading series. Can you tell me what reading series it is, if it was previously aligned to the Common Core, and if not, did you go through the reading series and align it, and what supplemental materials, if you're pulling in nonfiction, did you have to find that, or did it come with the series?
It's the benchmark reading series, and it is aligned to Common Core, although it was done, quite quickly to align in that first year, but it's mostly nonfiction. Actually, the guided reading books are all nonfiction. We just, in our school, we pull in a lot more nonfiction than we had, say, 10 years ago, but that's the nice part of it. It's all comprehension strategy based. So actually from K-5, all the classrooms are working on the same comprehension strategies at any given 3-week period.
And does it have closed reading lessons, or?
Somewhat, but I think we need to delve into that a little bit more. I think it's more that it was designed before that, although they did change it a little bit, but it's not quite aligned in that regard. Did you say what series did we have before?
No, I'm just wondering if you
Okay.
had to go, for those of us that have a series that's not aligned to the Common Core, and we have to go through and try to align it and pull in materials.
But I think
just
if
wondering.
I think as Dr. Morrell was saying, any good literature will work. It's just the way you're approaching that. Make sure you're getting that nonfiction in. Actually, with this benchmark, we do have to go in, and it's a 3-week period. So the first week is a shared reading with posters that develop the strategy, and then the second week is a nonfiction book that pretty much is over the heads of in first grade anyway. So we work on the comprehension strategy, and then the third week is a reader's theater, which is a little bit of a stretch there. But we do bring in shared reading daily with just good literature that we have. But it is quite, it's pressure all of a sudden to be on the spot for every day. You have to have a good, I'm a book addict. I'm also an LMC director. But I even found for myself, I probably have 5,000 books at home, all children's books. But to be on the spot, to have good quality, it takes a couple years, I think, to develop that. And to really do a good job with teaching the strategy and not just grabbing something and making it work will also take some thought. But our PTO has gotten us books. Our principal has had some money to get us some books, so we're on our way to do that.
Other questions? Well, please give another thanks to our teacher panelists.